This is Tell Your Story Alaska. We talk aviation, history, theology, but most of all, the raw stories of Alaskans and the gospel. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story Alaska. Today I want to do a review of a safety conference I went to recently at MARC down in Soldotna on the Kenai Peninsula. And I flew down there last week for the safety conference, and I took a whole bunch of notes, and I just wanted to do kind of shotgun, like what I got out of this aviation safety conference. And I'm just going to kind of do shotgun style little nuggets that I got from the safety conference that I walked away with. And so I've just got my notes that I took from this conference, and I'm just going to go through them. And I think there's a lot of little really neat tidbits in here about good aviation safety practices. So, I'm sorry I haven't recorded in a little while. It's been a pretty busy season as I prepare for summer. I took the family camping recently, and we kind of had to, camping doesn't really open in Alaska until May 22nd at most state campgrounds. And we kind of found that out the hard way, unfortunately. It was kind of hard to find that information on the website. So anyway, if you're a camper, you may want to wait till after May 22nd to make your plans. But we did find a little RV park and camped, and had to get all the little kinks out of, our kind of camping setup. Our camping trailer had some issues, and we might be doing some more camping this summer while I'm flying for the camps, or maybe not. We're still trying to figure out the housing, but been really busy doing some preparations for the busy summer camp season. But one of the things I did is attend this safety conference at MARC, which is which stands for Missionary Aviation. Hang on to make sure I get it right. Missionary Aviation Repair Center, MARC, down in Soldotna. It's been around for quite a while. And, I got to say, I didn't really know much about MARC, but having been there and got a taste of the culture there, I was quite impressed with just their staff. They were very welcoming, friendly, generous, humble. They even shared some things during the conference about mistakes they have made and learned from. It takes humility to share those mistakes, but when you hear those, that is how we all learn and become safer. So I'm really thankful for that. So I had a very good impression of MARC, and I hope to have a relationship with them and go back for maintenance needs and continue to attend their conferences. They're quite a good resource over there in Soldotna. All right, so at this aviation safety conference, I think it was last Thursday and Friday, so about a week ago. It took place over 2 days. Jeff and I flew my mall down the first day, and we flew home. We're home for dinner with the family back in the Matsu Valley. And then the second day we flew Jeff's Cherokee 6. We filed IFR and flew directly over Anchorage. And that was kind of cool. I've never flown directly over Anchorage before, but when you file IFR and you're on the radio with them, it makes it quite a cool experience. So anyway, well, I don't know if it was the first speaker, but it's the first bit of notes that I have from the conference, was a representative from AOPA. I don't remember his name. I should have written it down, but I really appreciated what he had to say. So here we go. We're going to do some shotgun nuggets that I got out of the conference that happened to be in my notes. Here we go. The lead and avgas boost the octane levels in their fuel. Yes, that's exciting to know. But what is interesting is that they are looking to remove the lead out of avgas. And so the question is there a replacement fuel if you can't have lead in the avgas? Because we need that to boost the octane level. Someone has come up with a fuel called G100UL, which is an unleaded avgas, which can be used in all piston engines. However, it's not FAA approved. So not that it affects me or you today, But it is interesting to know what's coming around the corner. I didn't realize how political the aviation world could be, but they kind of went into it. It is political, and there's issues with laws and legalities of these fuels, and they're trying to be environmentally friendly by removing the lead. And so that is an ongoing thing. And it's interesting how they talked about how avgas gets to Alaska, and it is all through one company that we get our avgas in Alaska. And there has been some challenges in getting the avgas here. Okay, there is a podcast from AOPA that they recommended, and I have listened to it, and it's quite good. It's called There I Was. This podcast will tell aviation stories. Maybe someone had an issue in their plane while flying, or they landed out in the remote bush somewhere, and they had some kind of experience with the airplane, and they tell stories that we can all learn from. So it's quite a good resource. And I've listened to a couple episodes. It's really quite good if you're interested in always being on top of your game and learning new things, because none of us know it all. Okay, something interesting is that fatal accidents are down 50% in the last 25 years in general aviation. And so he was pretty proud to announce that. And AOPA is... they exist to defend general aviation, the whole world of general aviation. AOPA is kind of like the number one organization to defend their legal rights under the law. And so they are very interested in increasing safety, and they put a lot of really good material like the podcast There I Was to educate people in general aviation for safety. So all things AOPA it's just really good stuff, so you should look into it. But whether it's because of AOPA or other factors, fatal airplane accidents have gone down 50% in the last 25 years. So really good news there. He talked about two ways of thinking. He says we have two systems of thinking. And this was really interesting and helpful to me. The system one is automatic. He had fancy names for these, but I just wrote down my layman's terms. It's automatic. It's kind of your reaction way of thinking, what you do without thinking, like breathing or reacting to something happening while you're flying. It happens very quickly, and you don't have to think about it. It's what your brain does on its own. So that's system one thinking. System two thinking is effortful mental activity. I think that's probably the terms he used. Effortful mental activity. This involves complex choices, and it's where you're actually engaging your mind to think about the situation that you're in as you are processing what's happening. And so he made several points about these. He said they did a study on like billionaires or other successful type people, and all of them are able to actively use system two when it's needed. So most people kind of rely on instincts. They revert to system one, just their automatic responses to things. But successful people are able to use system two on a whim, like they're able to engage it very frequently. And it's just very interesting that this is distinctive about successful people. And so as pilots, we need to exercise our minds to go to system two, to be making the mental effort to constantly be assessing what's happening in the cockpit, with the weather, with other traffic, with your passengers, to be actively engaged throughout the flight. And, I experienced this even after just a flight, an uneventful, normal flight. I feel mentally tired. And even though it was uneventful and not much happened, there's something about flying that's pretty exhausting. You just have to be alert all the time. You're flying in a tin can in the sky, and us humans are not really designed for that. And so it requires actively being alert. And it really is exhausting. And so the more as pilots we can be actively engaged with what's happening, which is our mental system two, which is how he describes it, the safer we will be. And he pointed out that as people, it's interesting, we are reluctant to engage and overrule system one. So what we instinctively do, our brains are able to engage System 2 and overrule System 1. We're able to do that. But our brains are reluctant to do that. And in aviation, you need to do that. So if you're an IMC and you don't have a horizon, you're relying on the instruments, you have to rely on System 2 completely because you are trusting the instruments. You're not trusting what your brain is telling you is straight and level. I've experienced this before, that disorientation feeling. You have to engage System 2. So anyway, that's a really important thing that I learned from this. Oh, it looks like I have a visitor.
Hi, Daddy.
All right, that was my 2, almost 3-year-old son popping in to say hello. He's still outside the door. All right, so here's an interesting thought that he shared. He said, if you ever find yourself saying something like, I've done this before, consider this a red flag. Like, oh, I've flown through that pass before. Even though the clouds are low, I'm a little uncomfortable with it, but I've done it before, or I've seen worse. He said, if you find yourself saying things like that to yourself, consider this a red flag and pause and try to objectively evaluate what you're getting into. He says, ask the question, what will be different this time? Last time, maybe you barely squeaked through and it was similar conditions, but you're like, but I made it. But what will be different this time? There could be new factors that weren't there last time. So it's good to be objective when you think about these and not just say, well, I've done it 100 times. So put up a red flag when you say that to yourself. Be willing to revisit any decision rather than find a way to execute a decision. He says our psychology is such that we tend to elevate bits of info that support our decision. If you're, hey bud, oh, here he comes again. Okay, so my children keep popping into my office to record here. And Evalie, my daughter, she's 5.5. She decided to join me for a little bit while I record. So I was just talking about how we tend to elevate bits of info that support our decisions. So we have a flight and we want to get there, and we tend to elevate bits of information that support the accomplishment of that flight. We need to watch out for this because we also tend to diminish bits of information that does not support that decision. So you might say, well, there's low clouds, the weather, it looks like there's a weather system moving in, but it'll probably turn north. Something like that. We tend to diminish information that will not lead to a successful flight, and we elevate bits of info that supports a successful flight. Our psychology as people tends to do this, and you must be aware of it. You can always say no to a flight, and I believe there's quite a bit more coming in my notes next on that. But I thought the AOPA guy was sharing about this, and it was very, very useful to me to understand our own psychology and how we think. Okay, another bit of information is that they shared is to always bring snacks. As pilots, if you get like low blood sugar, he said that our ability to make rational and good decisions diminishes. So he says always just fly with snacks. And I especially like that one because I really like to eat. He also said for spouses, if you are a spouse of a pilot, never pressure your pilot to make it home on time. It's better to be delayed a day than to not make it. And they often call this get there-itis. Has caused the death of many people. And so if you notice that you have a case of get there-itis, you need to pause and really reflect on the decision you're making. They say that accidents happen on cloudy days and they bury pilots on clear days, is kind of one of those sayings. Beware of, oh, hey, Sevlin, here comes another one.
What?
Hey, bud.
Hi.
You want to come record? Come here.
You want to come outside?
Oh, sure.
Okay, bye, Evalie. Thanks for joining me. See ya.
Bye.
Bye. Have fun. Okay, the kid's going outside. Oh, parenthood. And so I would like to get home safely to those 2 kids of mine. And so, yes, delaying a day if needed, if I'm uncomfortable. I just kind of evaluate my own comfort level. And I'm willing to take on some discomfort, but it's really a gray area. You have to make those decisions. But thinking about getting home to those two kids who just ran outside, yes, that makes the decisions much clearer for me for the safer side of things. Use personal minimums checklist. You can get one of these checklists on an AOPA website. And he pointed out to never wave these in the air. If you find yourself flying along and you are below your personal minimums, don't wave them right then and there while you're flying. Go home, land, revisit your personal minimums and change them on the ground. Never change them in the air. I thought that was a really good point. There's an article series on the AOPA website called Never Again, where they also tell aviation stories. I have looked at these, where they tell real life stories, things you can learn from. So that's a really good resource as well. Okay, we did a neat session. This is not the AOPA guy anymore. It was one of the, I think it was, I don't remember. It might have been the representative from Moody Aviation. But he asked us what safety meant. And the definition of safety sounds simple enough, but it actually is quite complicated because, safety is not the absence of risk, because if you're not willing to take any risk, you shouldn't be in aviation. Like, aviation is inherently risky. And so he asked us to sit down in small groups and come up with definitions. And so as a group, as you start discussing these things, you realize the tension that there is with the definition of safety, because it is not the absence of any risk at all. So then what is it? And so there's the tension between risk versus benefit. One thing we said was to accomplish a task at minimum risk. We came up with the idea of having a repeatable procedure to accomplish a goal, which you could also call them SOPs, standard operating procedures. It involves determining acceptable risk. How much risk am I willing to take on to accomplish this flight? You can determine, it forces you to determine priorities. And so what is the priority of this flight and how much risk am I willing to take on? And they did show an interesting chart. I have seen this chart before where it's like a risk assessment. And part of it has to do with, what are the consequences of this risk if the worst possible thing happened with the risk that we're taking? What are how severe are the consequences versus what's the likelihood of it happening? And it is an interesting way to process any decision making, is to use that risk assessment chart. But another element is, how important is the flight? Is someone dying? Like, will someone die if you don't accomplish the flight? Or will someone just be late? And so if someone's just going to be late, the amount of risk you're willing to take goes way down. You're not willing to risk much just to get someone there on time. But if someone's dying, depending on circumstances, you might be willing to take on some more risk. But then there's a level of risk that's just simply unacceptable, even if someone's dying, because the risk is too high to create more dead people. And that's obviously what we're trying to avoid. So just battling in your mind with a tension between safety versus risk versus benefit, and why are we doing this? What are we trying to accomplish? Whatever team you're flying with, these are really good things to sit down and consider. Whatever you come up with for your assessment, the answer needs to be simple, practical, and useful, they said. And they said one of the key is to slow down and make your decisions. Take a half an hour to discuss the risk rather than saying we have to leave right now. If you're flying in a speaker for an event, which I do, if the speaker can't make it on time for his first session, are you willing to, as the pilot, to say, sorry, he's going to miss the first event? And I do remember they actually told some stories. They told a story about a pilot had to fly the speaker in, and the weather was just terrible. He said, we can't fly him in right now. And so he ended up missing his first speaking session. Well, while they were waiting for weather to clear, that speaker had a health issue, and they were able to get him to a hospital because where he was waiting was near a hospital rather than being flown into a remote location to speak. And so it actually saved his life by saying no to a flight. So I thought that was a neat story. And you can also say, I trust in God's sovereignty. In fact, maybe I'll say it now because this was a neat part I wanted to point out. To say that we trust in God's sovereignty. You say the weather is bad, and it's diminishing or whatever. But if you say, well, I just trust the Lord and I'm going to do this flight because the speaker really needs to get there. It's so important that he gets there. And you say, because I trust the Lord. What if our mindset was different, though, and say, if I don't do this flight, the speaker will not get there on time, but I'm going to trust the Lord and say, no, I'm not going to do this flight. It's not safe. And I'm going to trust the Lord that he will work out, even though the speaker won't be there on time. Now, that, I think, is the better response to saying, well, God is sovereign, he'll take care of us, is to say no to a flight rather than yes. And that is trusting God's sovereignty. Because if you're saying yes because of some kind of pressure to get him there on time, then you're not trusting the Lord's sovereignty. You're succumbing to pressure. And so it's better to say no if you're uncomfortable with the flight and trust that the Lord will work it out. And that story about the speaker who had a health issue come up while they were waiting for weather to clear was a really good example of that. All right, some safety strategies they pointed out. Play the long game. So it's similar to, trying to get the speaker there on time. If you succumb to the pressure of getting the speaker there on time, but you end up getting yourself into trouble, causing an accident, we need to understand that taking massive risks like that, it's almost never, ever worth it because that's not playing the long game. You're trying to satisfy a temporary need by taking a long-term risk. That is not worth it. So they say play the long game. Be good at self-assessment. Am I tired? Did I sleep well last night? Did I just have a fight with my wife? Things like that. You need to be able to have self-assessment, and that requires humility. To say assertively, I don't feel good. I'm not up to this flight. I have a tummy ache. I'm irritated right now for some reason. I'm just not in a mental condition to fly. That requires humility, and make sure we do that self-assessment and not succumb to any kind of social pressure to do a flight. He says, plan ahead, be pre-prepared. Be pre-prepared for all contingencies. I think we'll talk more about that later in my notes. Ask the opinions of others. Wherever you are, there's probably someone more experienced than you. Have the humility to ask. What do you think about this situation? What would you do? Keep up your recurrent training. I just got a recurrency with my instrument. I went to a simulator and got 6 approaches in, and I'm actually going out later this afternoon to do more approaches and for proficiency in landing the Cherokee. So keep up the recurrent training and maintain your SOPs, your standard operating procedures. Safety culture, they really emphasize this one a lot. Whatever group you are with, even if it's just a bunch of friends having fun with the flying, is to have a good safety culture, being conservative. For most flights, the risk you're considering taking is probably not worth it. That's just for the vast majority of flights. To not have a culture of pressuring people to take risks they're uncomfortable with. And so they talked a lot about safety culture and how valuable that is. And having personal minimums. And like I said, the AOP website does have a personal minimums checklist that you can download that's really helpful. All right, this was another session. I just turned my page in my notes called Plan B. And this was a quote that I wrote down because I liked it. They said, pilots do not rise to the occasion. They sink to the level of their most recent training. And I really like that. So whatever your most recent training was, that's what you're going to revert to. It's not like you rise to some occasion and become a hero in a moment. You kind of revert downward, not upward in these challenging situations. So that's why keeping up your recurrencies and your training is vastly important. They said treat every takeoff like an optional event. So that's another way of saying don't take a risk you're not comfortable with. You don't ever have to do a flight, no matter how pressing it is. You're the pilot, you're PIC, you can always say no. And I am learning this, that as a pilot, you do have to be assertive. Even if other pilots are saying to you, like, well, I would do this flight, you can say no, even if other people say, well, I would do it. Then you just say, then you're the better pilot. And have the humility and the assertiveness to say that. They said, watch out from ultimatums from passengers or a manager. And an example of this would be like, if you don't get this generator out to the such and such location, the event won't happen. So that is an ultimatum. If you hear an ultimatum, this is a massive red flag. You're being pressured to take risks you probably are not comfortable with. It doesn't mean it's a definite no, but you need to not succumb to any ultimatums ever. As the pilot, you are in charge and you are given a massive amount of power and you should use it to say no. Well, then you'll say, if this generator doesn't get out there by this certain time, then I guess we're not doing the event. You need to be assertive enough to say that. All right. They also said dress to survive, not just arrive. And they told some stories about, taking passengers, across some remote tundra it's maybe not winter, but a colder time. And they think, well, we're just going to land and get out, go from the aircraft to the building. So I'm going to wear flip-flops and shorts. Well, you need to dress to survive, not just arrive. So don't just fly with flip-flops. Wear good hiking shoes, even if you're planning to land at a big airport. I thought that was quite good. He said, treat every night like an overnight. The speaker said he always flies with his toothbrush. And I thought that was really funny. But if you have to stop somewhere unexpectedly because of weather, so you're not at your destination, but you had to land somewhere else, bringing your toothbrush having a fresh mouth can really make a good morale difference. And so he said, treat every flight like an overnight. I like that. And I'm actually going to throw my toothbrush in the airplane now and some other few things with the idea, if I have to land somewhere and overnight at an airstrip, what would I want with me? So something like a toothbrush, it's basically no extra weight, and it really adds to some comfort level, which, believe it or not, adds safety. All right. It says take pause when you hear absolutes. And we talked about this a little bit, but like if someone says something like, we just got to get there, with that sense of urgency, just take pause. Oh, there's that sense of urgency. I remember hearing this at the safety conference, take pause. In the aviation world, we call this get there-itis, which has killed many people. So just, that red flag should go right up. It says, be ready for IMC. Have a pre-prepared plan. Like if we end up in IMC, this is what we're going to do. Most of the time, it's do a 180-degree turn and get out. That's probably 90% of the time. You're going to turn 180 degrees and get out. But be prepared for that. I thought this was good. He said, memorize this line and always be willing to say it. Here's the line. We are unable to remain in VMC, requesting immediate IFR flight plan to improved conditions. What a great line. If you're flying along and you end up in IMC conditions, you ought to be able to call up Anchorage Center or Flight Service and just say that line. I'm unable to remain in VMC, requesting immediate IFR flight plan to improved conditions. Now, what we've been told is that the people on the other end of flight service are not sitting around like, oh, well, this guy's an idiot. How could he possibly do this? That is not their attitude at all. We are told, and I believe them, that they are on it. They are there to help you. They're not criticizing you. They're not, thinking you're a terrible, dumb pilot. They just want to help you. And so that is the attitude that they take. And so when you call in and you say this, you are going to get help. So have some humility, say it, and get the help that you need. And God, it is really, really helpful. They just vector you. They say, fly this heading, fly this altitude. It's incredibly helpful. And so be willing to say that line and do that. Okay, they did an entire thing on maintenance. This was quite good. They said maintenance has a tension between three things: quality, cost, and time. Usually people want all three of these. Usually you can only have two: good quality, low cost, and short time. most of the time you cannot accomplish all three. And so this is the tension in all of maintenance. I thought that was quite good. He said all inspections are looking for condition and conformity. Condition is what's the condition of this thing that I'm inspecting, and then conformity is it conforming to legal standards. So that was a good summary of what maintenance does. Here we go. Just going to do some shotgun tidbits I got from it. The definition of shock cooling of your cylinders is 50 degrees a minute. I did not know that before, so I'm glad to have learned that. There's a website called Savvy Aviation, put on by Mike Bush. He's a very famous ANPIA mechanic. And you can upload your engine monitor data to that website, and the website will take that data and chart it out for you. They recommended that if you have an engine monitor, to download the data and to upload it to this website, and they will chart out your information for you in really clear and helpful ways. They also mentioned that the website does keep this information and use it for research purposes. So it's not like the government taking your personal info. And so it's really not a big deal, it seems, just to have your engine's performance information, because they vouched for the website that they're using it for good things for safety research. So it's helpful to you also to see what are the trends going on in your engine. And they even told a story about they were able to upload their information from their engine monitor on a 172. I think it had a Lycoming 0320 in it. That's a very common engine for that plane. And one of the CHTs was recording higher than all the others, and this was a trend, and it was progressively getting worse. Well, long story short, in the end, they were able to inspect that cylinder, and they found a crack in it that they did not see before. And so I thought that was quite helpful. Yeah, it's really helpful to download your engine monitor data and take a look at it, because it might reveal something, an issue that you missed in the inspection. All right. Another thing that they talked about was inspecting the exhaust, the exhaust system. They said make sure you remove the shrouds. The heat shrouds. So many people neglect this, and there can be issues underneath the heat shrouds. Some of these heat shrouds, or they can also be called heat exchangers, they have warped metal on the inside, and they highly recommend, if you see warped metal on the inside, a lot of mechanics will leave that alone, because most of the time there's no consequences of the warped metal on the inside. But if those do break off, it can cause some serious problems. So they recommended changing that out, even though it costs money. Unfortunately, that's a reality. But they highly recommend always remove the shrouds and inspect underneath them. Too many issues have come up by not inspecting underneath the shroud. They also pointed out that another neglected thing is ELTs. Most people do the normal ELT checks and check the ELT battery, but what a lot of mechanics miss is that the ELT controller has a battery in itself, and there's also a little speaker. It makes the beeping sound so you can know that it has been activated. There's a little battery in the speaker as well that often gets neglected. They talked about the old debate between rich of peak and lean of peak. And they said, we're not going to do an official recommendation, but we're just saying if you do lean of peak, it does reduce pressures and temperatures in the engine, which gives it more longevity. And so there is debate about lean of peak versus rich of peak. They didn't make an official recommendation, but it did seem like the data shows lean of peak is more beneficial for your engine. They mentioned to never have nylon lock nuts forward of the firewall, and also do not use rubber Adel clamps to hold control cables. All that heat can cause deterioration in the rubber and in the nylon, and those could fail. And so for the Adel clamps, use dimpled clamps with safety wire instead. And so I thought that was quite helpful. And also, I probably need to take a look under my cowling. That's all I'll say about that. Okay, this was an interesting tidbit. It was, I won't name him, but someone from the Airmen's Association did a talk about some of the things going on in Alaska. He went through quite a few things, like some attempts to change some radio frequencies in certain areas. And in my experience flying, especially in the Matsu Valley, we often describe it as flying in a beehive. And it's true. It's like all of a sudden there's a plane like really close to you, and there has been some mid-air collisions. Part of the issue is that there is one radio frequency for, I don't know how many, quite a large number of airports in the area. And so you have a busy radio for servicing so many airports, and there's more and more airplanes popping up, and the airspace is getting busier and busier. And so there's been debate about splitting up the frequencies some more on how to manage that, and it becomes quite a heated debate from what I hear. But it would be nice, to have more efficient radio frequency areas. But so that's an ongoing debate among the Airmen's Association and the FAA. So this was kind of interesting. Up in Clear, Alaska, there's a little military base, which is part of the new Space Force that Trump set up. There's a new radar system there that has recently been completed, and a new restricted airspace is around the town of Clear because of this new radar system. Apparently, the radar system is so intense that if you were to fly in front of it, it could damage you physically and ruin your aircraft systems. And I asked the speaker about this, and I said, "What do you mean by that? What does that mean?" He said, "Just imagine sticking your head in a microwave. And how healthy do you think that would be?" I said, "Yeah, that doesn't sound good." So he said, "Yes, so you need to be aware of this new radar system." We talked about, even though there is a TFR there that is even larger than the restricted airspace for a lot of reasons, they're trying to make that restricted airspace larger, a wider radius around this new radar system in Clear, Alaska, because when they crank this thing on high, it could really cause some damage to your aircraft or to your own self. And so what we learned was, if you are flying around Clear, Alaska, which I very much will be, I need to stay east of this restricted airspace. Try not to fly west of it, because that radar is pointed west. And of course, it's a military radar. They are looking west for military reasons. And when they crank that thing on, it could be quite powerful and intense. There is a radio station, if you tune into 133.25 when you're flying in that area, they will announce on that station if that radar is cranked up and hot. And so you need to be aware of that when you're flying through there. Now, east of the restricted airspace, there is a power line that runs north-south. And so if you're just flying on a sectional, you don't have your GPS, look for that power line and stay along that, and you'll be fine. Another interesting thing is a huge NOTAM that has gone out in Alaska. This NOTAM indicates that between May 3rd and 20th, which today I think is the 19th, so it's almost over, the GPS system over Alaska is going to fail at random times. Now, the best information we have, this is coming from the military, that this will happen on weekdays in a 2-hour window in the morning and a 2-hour window in the afternoon is when the military guys are running these GPS tests where they are jamming the GPS. And so it is, as in general aviation, it's kind of upsetting that the federal government was working really hard, pushing GPS systems. Hey, everyone turn to GPS. And GPS is awesome. It's so accurate and just convenient. It reduces your workload in the cockpit quite a bit. And so they said, yeah, turn over to GPS, which we did. And now they're, jamming the GPS for military reasons. So they probably have a good reason, which we don't know. Of course, the military has their own stuff going on. But as pilots, we got to be aware that you absolutely cannot totally rely on GPS for terrain avoidance or navigation. You need to have some kind of a backup. There are some resources, like there's a product called Garmin Glow, and this is a GPS that can tap into other GPS systems from other countries. And so different countries have their own GPS satellites. The Garmin Glow will tap into the Russian GPS. There's another one called Galileo Constellation, which will tap into the European GPS system. So you can get that. Hey guys!
There's a matcha.
There's a monster out there? Oh my goodness. Are you okay?
Check it out here.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna finish working, okay? I'll be out in a minute. There we go. There's more parenthood there. Another reminder to stay safe because I want to keep being their dad. Okay, they also mentioned it's very important to update your GPS database. There has been changes recently. There are new waypoints available here in Alaska that they've just put out. And also, Jeff and I just flew the GPS approach, runway 25, the RNAV approach into Big Lake, and that approach has been changed recently. So it's very important to update your GPS databases. Okay, there's probably a lot more. Oh, there is. Yes. We had a speaker. I'm going to do this briefly because I don't want the episode to get too long. But we had a survival guy, like a medical guy. He was, I don't know what he called himself, but he was basically a trauma response in Afghanistan. And so, you know, when a soldier got wounded, he was the guy that they brought him to. He was a medic, you know. And so he was an expert in trauma response. And he did several hours, I think, of a presentation. And, you know, if you go down on your aircraft and you have passengers who have trauma, what do you do? So I thought this was quite helpful. A few of the things that the guys at MARC said, first of all, said if you have a coughing engine, they went through some of the procedures. I think I'll skip that just because you probably have your own emergency procedures if you don't get them. But what do you do if you have a coughing engine? Maybe you should keep ATC tower on your phone. Make sure you have your inReach on and tracking, stuff like that. This was the interesting thing that I wanted to point out. Some studies done on deceleration, because obviously if your airplane crashes, there's a deceleration that happens. So how much can our bodies handle? And there's a bunch of debate on that. However, if you go from, they've done studies on this, if you go from 60 knots speed to 0 knots in 1 second time, your body will experience 3 Gs. 3 Gs. Our bodies can handle 3 Gs just fine. And so that deceleration in your own mind, to know that if I can just be 60 knots and if I can have 1 second of deceleration time, I will only have a 3 Gs and I should survive this thing. So that is a very hopeful thing. If you have an engine out and you got to land somewhere, if you can get down to 60 knots when you land and you can stop in 1 second, you'll probably survive. So that's a hopeful thought. So make it your goal, do 60 knots in 1 second deceleration on your emergency landing. They recommended shoulder harnesses are the number one lifesaver because blunt force trauma is the number one killer of airplane crashes. So a shoulder harness keeps your body from swinging forward and hitting the panel. And that is the number one lifesaver in aircraft crashes. And I do have shoulder harnesses in both the airplanes I fly. All right. I asked this question when we were there. I said, if I'm flying over the tundra, I see a lot of swampy land, I see a lot of trees, and I see kind of some open fields. What do I want to look for? And so their recommendation was try not to land in the water. Some people say try to land in the water because it'll help with the deceleration. But they say landing in the water is a high chance of a flipped airplane. If you're upside down in water, those swampy areas are usually deeper than you might think, and that could be a really bad situation. So they said that look for green. The greener it is, the more firm the ground is, and that's kind of what you want. You want to land on firm ground where there is more green open area. So you don't really want to land in trees, but I tend to think that if I had to, I would rather land in trees than on water. And if you do have to land in trees, try to make the wings take the blow. Line yourself up so the wings hit the trees, not the fuselage. But ideally, you want to look for a greener field and aim for that for your landing spot. Think about trying to land uphill. That helps a lot with deceleration. And so that's always helpful. In a post-accident situation, they said you want to evacuate, medicate, communicate, and conserve. So I'll let you think about what those words mean and how you want to handle post-landing, post-crash issue. Okay, so now speaking of medical traumas, this was a really neat session. I thought was really helpful. I'm going to try to go through it very briefly, but he says there's the 3 B's you want to think about: blood, breathing, and brain. The first thing that you want to do is stop bleeding. The number one, or actually this is the number 2 killer besides blunt force trauma in airplane accidents, is bleeding out. That's the number 2 killer. So if you survive the crash, you have gotten past the number 1 killer of airplane accidents. The number 2 killer is bleeding out. So some horrible cut on your leg, especially your leg where you have the main artery there, you absolutely have to stop the bleeding as quickly as possible. He says in your body you have 5 liters of blood. You can lose 2 liters and still live. So you need a minimum of 3 liters in your body to survive. If you lose more than 2, that's it. If you see bright red blood bleeding, it's usually pretty squirty. That's very life-threatening. If you see dark red blood, it usually oozes. That's less life-threatening. That's helpful to know. You should have in your survival kit a tourniquet. And he recommended getting the SAM XT tourniquet. It's easy to use. It's kind of user-friendly, if you will. It's called the SAM XT tourniquet. And so I plan on buying one of those. But if you have that red squirty blood coming out of a wound in your limb, you apply it high and tight, they say. And the tourniquet will wrap around your arm or leg above the wound near your torso and cinch it down really, really tight. You got to stop that bleeding. So I thought that was really helpful to go through, and he showed us the tourniquet. So if you don't have one, order the SAM XT and put that in your survival kit. The other thing you're going to want is hemostatic gauze. This is a gauze that's infused with something that causes coagulation of the blood. So some wounds you want to take this gauze and you stuff it into the wound where that's the source of the bleeding, and the blood will mix with the gauze and cause coagulation and stop the bleeding. And so they say it's extremely painful to stuff this gauze into a wound, but it's what you got to do. He said you probably won't be able to do it to yourself unless you're like a super soldier or something, because it's extremely painful, but you just got to do it. Stuff it in there. He said packing this hemostatic gauze tends to be more successful than improvised tourniquets. I thought that was really interesting. Some people say, I thought it was interesting that he said belts actually do not make very good tourniquets. So he said a lot of people say that, oh, I'll just use my belt. But he says they actually don't make very good tourniquets. So buy a tourniquet, the SAM XT, and if you have to improvise one, do it. Make sure you use a stick and you twist it. He had a fancy name for the stick, where you wrap it around your tourniquet and twist the stick, tighten it. I forget what he called it, but I don't worry about terms like that. I just know it's a stick. So use an improvised one if you have to. But he did say packing the hemostatic gauze is more successful than tourniquets. I thought that was interesting. Okay, after you stop the bleeding, you want to look for airways, and you do the head tilt chin lift to someone who doesn't seem to be breathing well. You tilt their head back and lift their chin, and you put your ear up to their mouth, and you look, listen, and feel. So ear up to their mouth, you're looking at their chest, the up and down movement. You're listening for the breathing, and you feel, are they breathing normally? So be looking for that. Talked about CPR. I mean, they talk about a lot of things. I'm trying to rip through this thing fast. CPR is still 2 rescue breaths and 30 chest compressions. Do it hard and fast. The interesting thing is that he said you never stop until help arrives. There's no time limit to CPR. When you're breathing for a person, blowing oxygen into their lungs, you could be keeping them alive by doing that. And continuing the chest compressions, there's no time limit. So just keep doing it. And I was like, well, you say no time limit. I mean, how long does this go? Because apparently doing CPR on someone is extremely exhausting. And it's hard to keep it up even for a couple hours, even for a very fit person. And so he's like, yes, at some point you do have to stop. And he's like, and I can't really tell you when that is. But from a medical perspective, there is no time limit on how long you perform CPR on a person. So that was very interesting. He also talked about keeping baseline. What baseline means is you're looking for a heart rate of 60 to 100 beats per minute. And you can get the heart rate by feeling for that pulse. You count the number of beats in 15 seconds and multiply it by 4, and that's your heart rate. You're looking for 60 to 100 in the heart rate. For breath rate, you're looking for 12 to 15 breaths per minute. And then there's this cool thing called the capillary. You can squeeze a person's finger, and you can try right now. Squeeze your finger, and you'll notice it turns white, and then it turns back red again. And so the amount of time it takes to turn from white to red is your capillary. And it should be 2 seconds or less to return back to red. If it's not turning back to red, if it's taking more than 2 seconds, then you have a blood issue, a heart issue. Okay, so that's your baseline, and always be checking for that. Let's see, hyperthermia is defined as a body temperature of below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. That was helpful to know. There's also someone who's going into shock. You'll see various symptoms of that. And the one that stood out to me was a person might have different size pupils in their eyes. So you can look at their eyes and see if they have different size pupils. Now, some people naturally have different size pupils, so you can ask them, is your eyes normally like that? But that could be a sign of someone going into shock. Okay, and then this will be the last thing. They talked about when your airplane is down somewhere and you've taken care of the trauma issues, people are stabilized. Now what do you do? Well, hopefully you'll have some kind of personal locator beacon. And so you can send out a distress signal. That's obviously the best if you can get that out. If you don't have that, you definitely want to have sectionals with you. If you have a sectional and you're able to determine approximately where you are, you can use a sectional to get your coordinates. So if your airplane radio is still working or you have a handheld, you can try to get on there and get a hold of airline airplanes on 121.5. They don't always monitor these, but many of them still do. Or try to get on flight service or Anchorage Center or even the local CTAF. Get on these to connect with anyone who might be able to listen. If you have a sectional with you, you can use that to get coordinates for your location. If you can tell by the terrain around you and where you last known location, anything you can do to narrow down your location. They talked about carrying a laser light or a light that flashes to get the attention of airplanes, or a mirror that reflects the sunlight. They talked about road flares are just awesome. They're cheap and effective. They start fires, and it's a light source for make yourself more visible. 3 of something, an X or an SOS means rescue. So for example, if you have a gun, just point it in the air and do 3 gunshots. 3 gunshots means rescue. Or if you have a whistle, do 3 whistles. That means rescue. Or if you have an open area, set up 3 fires on the beach or whatever the area is. That means I need rescue. Some kind of markings, a flag, just a pile of rocks, anything you can make. 3 of something means rescue. And they recommended you stay at the crash site. Don't try to walk off and rescue yourself. That extends a lot of energy. You absolutely have to do energy conservation. All right, I think that's about it. I've talked long enough, but these are some of the things that I got out of this aviation safety conference. Mostly, I really just appreciated meeting other pilots who are flying in the same area and conditions that I do, and pilots that are much more experienced than I, telling their stories, and just being able to connect with them. I collected several phone numbers. I'm hoping to connect with them more in the future. That really was one of the biggest blessings, was meeting new aviators who are concerned with safety. And so I wanted to share some of the things that I got out of this safety conference with you. So I hope you picked up a nugget or two, and I hope it caused you to sit down and think about your flying safety. So, hey, thank you guys for listening in. I'm going to try to get some more episodes in soon, but the season is about to get quite busy. So if you don't hear from me for a while, that is why. Thanks for listening in, and stay safe out there. Blue skies, everyone. If you have a story that you would like told, please contact me at tysalaska@gmail.com, tysalaska@gmail.com.